Edwin Lancaster had spent decades building an empire, but one voice shattered it all. "How touching, Father," came the interruption at his charity gala. The son he abandoned had returned, not for revenge, but for truth. And the truth would destroy everything. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Edwin Lancaster stood at the podium of the Grand Plaza Hotel's ballroom, his custom-made Italian suit reflecting the sparkle of 1,000 camera flashes. At 65, he was still an impressive figure, tall, distinguished, with perfectly styled silver hair and the confidence that came from decades of getting exactly what he wanted. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the packed charity gala. "Tonight we celebrate not just success, but family values. The Lancaster name has always stood for excellence, integrity, and doing what's right." The crowd of New York's elite nodded in appreciation. They all knew Edwin's story, or at least the version he wanted them to know. Self-made billionaire, ruthless in business but generous in charity, widowed young but devoted to his late wife's memory. The perfect American success story. "My father taught me that a man's worth is measured not by what he has, but by what he gives back," Edwin continued, conveniently forgetting how he'd forced his own father out of the company 30 years ago. "That's why tonight, I'm proud to announce the Lancaster Foundation's $50 million pledge to children's charities across the country." More applause, more camera flashes. Edwin allowed himself a small smile. These events were like theater to him, and he was the star performer. In the front row, his current wife Victoria beamed up at him. At 40, she was his third wife, though the public only knew about his first. Victoria was perfect for his image, beautiful, sophisticated, and most importantly, willing to play her role without asking too many questions. "But tonight isn't just about giving money," Edwin said, his practiced voice catching just enough emotion to seem sincere. "It's about family, about standing by those who need us most, about never turning our backs on—" "How touching, Father." V.E. voice came from the back of the room, clear, strong, cutting through Edwin's words like a knife through butter. The crowd turned, murmurs spreading through the well-dressed audience. Edwin's hands gripped the podium. That word, father. Something about it sent a chill down his spine, though he couldn't say why. He squinted against the stage lights, trying to see who had spoken. A figure moved through the crowd. People stepped aside, creating a path. Edwin saw the cane first, sleek, black, expensive. Then the suit, perfectly tailored. Finally, the face. The young man couldn't have been more than 30. He was handsome, with dark hair and sharp features that seemed somehow familiar, but it was his eyes that made Edwin's blood run cold. They were his mother's eyes. "Please," the young man said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent ballroom, "don't let me interrupt such a moving speech about family values." He took another step forward, the tap of his cane echoing. "I'm particularly interested in the part about never turning our backs on those who need us." Edwin's mouth went dry. Impossible, it couldn't be. He'd made sure— "Security," Victoria called out, rising from her seat. But the young man held up his hand. "Oh, they won't interfere," he said calmly. "You see, I'm a major donor to this charity. In fact, I'm on the board. I have every right to be here." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Unlike some people, I believe in actually practicing what I preach about helping others." The whispers in the crowd grew louder. Phones were out, now recording everything. Edwin could practically see his carefully crafted image crumbling before his eyes. "I don't know who you are," Edwin said, trying to keep his voice steady, "but this is hardly the place for—" "My name is Samuel," the young man cut him off. "Though you wouldn't know that, would you? You never bothered to name me. The nurses at St. Mary's Hospital did that after you left me at the train station. December 15th, 1994. It was snowing. Do you remember the snow, Father?" The gasps were audible now. Victoria had gone pale. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide her shock. The reporters in the crowd were typing frantically on their phones. "I was 6 hours old," Samuel continued, his voice never wavering. "Born with a condition that made my right leg weaker than my left. Not a tragedy, not a life-threatening situation, just a small imperfection that might have required some extra care and attention. But that wasn't acceptable for the great Edwin Lancaster, was it? Your image required perfection. Edwin felt the room spinning. 20 years of carefully constructed lies were unraveling in minutes. He could see the judgment in people's eyes, the phones recording his downfall, the reporters who would turn this into tomorrow's headlines. "You're lying," he managed to say, but his voice sounded weak even to his own ears. Samuel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "DNA test results," he said, holding them up. "Hospital records, witness statements, even the security camera footage from the train station. I've spent years gathering everything, Father, making sure there would be no doubt when this moment came." Edwin's hands were shaking now. He could feel sweat running down his back, staining his expensive suit. "But here's what might surprise you," Samuel said, taking another step forward. "I'm not here for your money. I don't want your empire or your name. I have my own success built without your help or influence. No, I'm here for something else entirely." The room held its breath. Edwin found himself gripping the podium so hard, his knuckles had turned white. "I'm here to offer you a chance," Samuel said. "One chance to prove you're not the monster who could abandon his newborn son on a winter night. One chance to show there's something human left in you." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small wrapped package. "Tomorrow morning I'll be having breakfast at the Carter Street Diner. 8 a.m. Come alone. Open this package, and if you can do what it asks, truly do it, not just pretend, then maybe there's hope for you yet." Samuel placed the package on a nearby table. "Oh, and one more thing," he added, turning back to face the stunned crowd. "I wasn't alone that night at the train station. Someone else saw everything. Someone who's been waiting 20 years for this moment too." With that, he turned and walked away, the tap of his cane fading into the shocked silence of the ballroom. Edwin stared at the small package on the table, knowing that whatever was inside would change his life forever. The perfect life he'd built was already crumbling. By morning, everyone would know his darkest secret. But somehow, that seemed less terrifying than what might be waiting for him in that package. As the whispers around him grew into a roar of speculation and judgment, Edwin Lancaster, for the first time in his life, felt truly afraid of what tomorrow would bring. Victoria Lancaster slammed the morning newspaper down on the marble kitchen counter. Every major paper in New York had Edwin's scandal on the front page. Lancaster empire built on lies, billionaire abandoned disabled infant. The headlines screamed at them from every angle. "Do something," she demanded, pacing the penthouse kitchen in her silk robe. "Call your lawyers, call the press, tell them it's all lies." Edwin sat at the counter looking older than his 65 years. He hadn't slept all night. The small package from Samuel sat unopened in front of him, wrapped in plain brown paper. "I can't," he said quietly. "He has proof, DNA tests, hospital records, everything." "Then pay him off." Victoria's voice rose higher. "That's what he wants, isn't it? Money. Everyone wants money." Edwin shook his head. "You didn't see his eyes, Victoria. He doesn't want money. He has his own success." He picked up one of the papers, reading the details they'd already uncovered about Samuel. Samuel Chen, founder of Access Tech Industries, self-made millionaire by 25. His company develops medical devices and adaptive technologies for people with disabilities. "Chen?" Victoria stopped pacing. "But that's not your last name." "The family that adopted him," Edwin explained, his voice hollow. "A Chinese-American couple. Middle class. The father was a high school teacher, the mother ran a small restaurant." He let out a bitter laugh. "They gave him everything I wouldn't. Love, support, pride in who he was, disability and all." The phone rang again, the 10th time in the last hour. Edwin's publicity team was desperate to start damage control. But what could they possibly say? The truth was out there with proof that couldn't be denied. "You have to go to that diner," Victoria said suddenly. 8 a.m. That's what he said. "Maybe we can still fix this. Make him see reason." Edwin looked at the clock. Certes 15 a.m. The Carter Street Diner was only 15 minutes away, but he felt like he was about to walk to his own execution. "What's in the package?" Victoria asked, eyeing the brown-wrapped object. Edwin's hands shook as he finally reached for it. The paper fell away easily, revealing a small, worn photo album. His breath caught in his throat as he opened it. Inside were photos of Samuel growing up, a smiling baby in his adoptive mother's arms, a young boy taking his first steps with braces on his leg, a teenager receiving an award at a science fair, a college graduation photo. Each picture showed a happy, loved child growing into a successful man, no thanks to his biological father. But it was the last photo that made Edwin's hands tremble. It showed the train station from 20 years ago, taken from the security camera. In the grainy image, a younger Edwin could be seen walking away from a bundle on a bench, and in the background, barely visible but there, was a figure watching, the witness Samuel had mentioned. A note fell from the album's last page. Edwin picked it up, reading the neat handwriting. "The task is simple, Father. Come to the diner and do the one thing you've never done in your life. Tell the complete truth, no lies, no excuses, just honesty about that night and every choice you've made since. If you can do that, we'll talk about what comes next. If you can't, well, the witness from that night has quite a story to tell." Edwin closed the album slowly. The truth. His entire life had been built on carefully constructed lies, each one protecting him from the consequences of his actions. Could he even remember what the real truth was anymore? "I'm coming with you," Victoria declared, heading for the bedroom to change. "No," Edwin stopped her. "He said to come alone, and for once in my life, I need to do exactly what I'm told." Minutes later, Edwin stood in front of his closet staring at his rows of expensive suits. For the first time, they felt like costumes, props in the elaborate show he'd been putting on his whole life. Instead of his usual power suit, he reached for an old sweater and simple slacks. Today, he needed to be just a man facing his sins, not Edwin Lancaster, the billionaire. The drive to the diner felt surreal. No driver today, no security team. Just Edwin in his modest clothes, driving his least flashy car through the morning traffic. News vans were already gathering outside his building as he left, but none of them recognized him in this outfit. The Carter Street Diner was exactly the kind of place Edwin had spent his life avoiding. Small, ordinary, with vinyl booths and coffee that cost $2 a cup. Through the windows he could see Samuel already seated in a booth, that elegant cane propped against the table. Edwin parked across the street, his hands gripping the steering wheel. In all his years of business, through hostile takeovers and cutthroat deals, he'd never felt fear like this, because this wasn't about money or power. This was about facing the worst thing he'd ever done. A light rain began to fall as Edwin finally stepped out of his car. Each step toward the diner's door felt heavier than the last. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, a cheerful sound that felt out of place on this morning of reckoning. Samuel looked up from his coffee cup, those familiar eyes, so like his mother's, watching Edwin's approach. "You came," he said simply. "And you opened the package. Good. Sit down, Father. It's time we had an honest conversation about that snowy night in December, don't you think?" Edwin slid into the booth, feeling the vinyl crack beneath him. A waitress approached with a coffee pot, but Samuel waved her away. "We'll let you know when we're ready to order," he told her kindly. Then those eyes fixed on Edwin again. "Well, I'm listening. Tell me about the night you decided your reputation was worth more than your son's life." The morning crowd at the Carter Street Diner went about their business, unaware that a life-changing drama was unfolding in the corner booth. Edwin Lancaster, stripped of his usual power and presence, sat across from the son he'd abandoned 20 years ago. "Your mother," Edwin finally began, his voice barely above a whisper, "was a waitress at a restaurant I used to visit. Angela Chen, no relation to your adoptive family." He paused, looking down at his untouched coffee. "She wasn't part of my world. My first wife had just died and I was lost." "Spare me the romance novel version," Samuel cut in. "I know you were married when you met her. Your first wife wasn't dead. She was dying of cancer in the hospital while you started an affair with my mother." Edwin flinched. "Yes, that's true. Angela was young, beautiful, and she made me feel alive when everything else in my life was about death and business obligations. And when she told you she was pregnant, I paid her to go away," Edwin admitted. $100,000 to disappear and never contact me again. She refused, Said the baby, "You deserved better than that." Samuel's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "But she died in childbirth." "Yes." Edwin's voice cracked. "There were complications. When the doctors told me about your leg condition, I convinced myself I was doing you a favor, that you'd have a better life with a family that could accept you as you were." "Liar." Samuel's word cut through the air like a whip. "Try again. Father, remember the deal, complete honesty." Edwin's shoulders slumped. "You're right. I didn't think about what was best for you. I thought about my reputation, about the Lancaster name, about the board members and shareholders who were already questioning my stability after my wife's death. A scandal involving an affair and an illegitimate child would have ruined everything I'd built. So you left a newborn baby at a train station in December." Samuel's voice remained steady, but his eyes blazed. "Did you even make sure someone would find me?" Edwin swallowed hard. "I called the police from a payphone after I left, made an anonymous report." "How generous of you." Samuel's sarcasm was sharp. "Did you ever try to find out what happened to me?" "No." Edwin stared into his coffee. "I forced myself not to think about it. Buried myself in work. Built the company bigger than ever. Married again, then again after that divorce. Created charitable foundations to convince myself I was a good person. And now?" Samuel leaned forward. "Now that everyone knows the truth, what do you feel?" Edwin looked up, meeting his son's eyes for the first time. "Shame. Not just for what I did, but for spending 20 years pretending I'd done nothing wrong." "Better," Samuel nodded slightly. "That almost sounded honest, but we're not finished. Tell me about Marion Brooks." The color drained from Edwin's face. "How do you—" "The witness, Father. The person who saw you leave me that night. Did you really never wonder who it was?" Edwin's mind raced back 20 years. Marion Brooks, his first wife's private nurse. She'd confronted him a week after that night, threatening to expose what he'd done. He'd paid her off with enough money to ensure her silence. "Marion," he whispered. "She was there, coming home from her evening shift at the hospital?" Samuel confirmed. "She saw everything, and she's been waiting 20 years to tell her story." "The money," Edwin started. "Wasn't enough to silence her conscience forever," Samuel finished. "She's the one who helped me find my adoption records, who gave me that security camera photo, who's been gathering evidence all these years." Edwin felt the walls closing in. "What do you want from me? Money? Shares in the company? Name it." Samuel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Still thinking like a businessman?" "No, Father. I want something far more valuable." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Inside this envelope is a letter. A confession Marion wrote on her deathbed last year. Edwin's hand shook as he reached for the envelope. "She had cancer," Samuel continued. "Just like your first wife, but unlike you, she spent her final months trying to right a wrong. Her letter doesn't just tell the story of that night at the train station. It tells the story of what really happened to your first wife." Edwin froze, his hand inches from the envelope. "Yes," Samuel's voice was deadly quiet now. "Marion was there for all of it. How you cut off your wife's pain medication to make her more lucid when the lawyers came to change her will. How you convinced her family to stay away in her final weeks. How you made sure you controlled everything she had before she died." "No," Edwin whispered. "You can't prove." "The beauty of deathbed confessions," Samuel continued, "is that people tend to include every detail. Names, dates, other witnesses. Marion was very thorough. And she left copies of this letter with several trusted friends to be released to the press if anything happens to me." The diner seemed to spin around Edwin. His carefully constructed world wasn't just crumbling, it was being obliterated. "So here's what's going to happen," Samuel said, his voice still calm and controlled. "You're going to take this envelope. Inside, along with Marion's letter, is a list of demands. Not for me. I meant it when I said I don't want your money. These demands are about making things right for all the people you've hurt over the years. And if I refuse, then Marion's letter goes public tomorrow morning. Your empire won't just be damaged, it will be destroyed, and you'll probably face criminal charges." Samuel pushed the envelope across the table. "You have 24 hours to decide." Edwin stared at the envelope, his hand trembling as he finally picked it up. "Oh, and Father." Samuel stood, gripping his cane. "Don't bother trying to find out who has the other copies of the letter." Marion was smarter than that. The only way to keep it private is to do exactly what that list demands. As Samuel turned to leave, Edwin found his voice one last time. "Wait. You said if I told the truth about that night, we'd talk about what comes next." Samuel paused. "We just did. The truth bought you a chance to save what's left of your reputation and stay out of jail. That's more than you gave me that night at the train station." He took a step, then turned back. "The next move is yours, Father. Choose wisely." The bell above the diner door chimed as Samuel left, leaving Edwin alone with his coffee, the envelope, and the weight of 20 years of sins finally catching up to him. Outside, the morning rain had turned into a downpour, as if the heavens themselves were passing judgment on Edwin Lancaster's life of lies. Back in his car, Edwin's hands shook so badly he could barely open the envelope. Rain drummed on the roof as he pulled out 2 pieces of paper, Marion's letter and the list of demands. He started with the letter, his heart pounding as he began to read. "My name is Marion Brooks. Before God and with my last breath, I swear that every word of this testimony is true." The letter went on, describing in detail how Edwin had manipulated his dying wife's final days. Marion had kept a diary, documenting every conversation, every changed prescription, every late-night meeting with lawyers. She'd even saved some of the original medication orders that Edwin had altered. "God forgive me for my silence," the letter concluded. "I told myself the money would help more people than the truth would." But watching Edwin Lancaster build his reputation as a philanthropist while knowing the evil he's capable of, I can't take that knowledge to my grave. Edwin felt sick. He'd thought Marion was just a witness to the train station incident, but she'd known everything, had seen everything. And now, even from the grave, she held the power to destroy him. His phone buzzed. Victoria had been calling non-stop, but this was different. A text message from an unknown number. "The clock is ticking, Father. 23 hours left. Better read the list." With trembling fingers, Edwin unfolded the second paper. The demands were numbered, each one more difficult than the last. Resign as CEO of Lancaster Industries immediately. Transfer 50% of your personal wealth to a new charitable foundation, one you will have no control over. Sign a legally binding confession about your first wife's death and the train station incident. 4. Face your first wife's family and tell them the truth about her final days. Publicly acknowledge Samuel as your son and the true heir to the Lancaster name. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "This isn't about revenge, Father. It's about justice. About facing consequences, something you've avoided your entire life." Edwin's phone buzzed again with another text. "Don't bother trying to find me. I'm not the one you need to convince. The person who holds the other copies of Marion's letter will contact you. They'll know if you're really following through or just pretending." The rain grew, heavier, matching Edwin's darkening thoughts. He started the car, not sure where he was going until he found himself pulling up to the cemetery where his first wife was buried. Sarah Lancaster's grave was well maintained, part of his carefully crafted image as the grieving widower. He stood in the rain, staring at the marble headstone he'd visited for photos, but never out of genuine grief. "I'm sorry," he whispered, water running down his face. Or were they tears? After so many years of suppressing real emotions, he wasn't sure he could tell the difference anymore. His phone rang again. "Victoria, where are you?" she demanded when he answered. "The press is camped outside the building. Your lawyer's going crazy. The board is calling for an emergency meeting. You need to come home now." "No," Edwin said quietly. "No more running, no more hiding. What are you talking about? Whatever that boy wants, we can fight this. We have the best lawyers, the best PR team. It's over, Victoria." Edwin's voice was firm. "The life we've been living, the lies we've been telling, it's all over. You can't be serious. You're going to let him destroy everything we have?" Edwin looked at Sarah's grave, remembering Marion's letter. "I destroyed everything a long time ago. I just didn't know it." He hung up despite Victoria's protests and dialed another number, one he hadn't used in years. "Hello," a woman's hesitant voice answered. "Margaret, this is Edwin Lancaster, Sarah's husband." There was a long pause. "After 15 years, you have no right to call yourself her husband." "I know." Edwin took a deep breath. "That's why I'm calling. It's time you knew the truth about your sister's final days." "Why now?" "Because I have a son I abandoned. Because your sister deserved better. Because Marion Brooks kept a record of everything I did." His voice broke. "And because for the first time in my life, I'm afraid of dying with all these sins on my soul." Another long pause, then, "Come to my house tonight, I'll call the rest of the family." As Edwin hung up, his phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Good start, Father. The first step of many. But remember, we're watching." No more lies. Thunder rumbled overhead as Edwin made his way back to his car. The first demand on the list, resigning as CEO, would send shockwaves through the business world. His board would fight it. His lawyers would try to stop it. Victoria would probably leave him, but as he drove toward Margaret's house, Edwin felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Relief. The weight of his lies, carried for so many years, was crushing him. Maybe Samuel was right. Maybe this wasn't about revenge at all. His phone buzzed one final time. "By the way, Father, Marion wasn't the only one keeping records. Ask Victoria about the private investigator she hired last year. Ask her what she found out about your second wife's accident." Edwin nearly drove off the road. His second wife's car crash, the one that had left him a widower for the second time. The accident, he couldn't think about that now. But as he drove through the storm, Edwin Lancaster realized his day of reckoning was only beginning. Samuel and Marion had merely opened the door. Behind it lay 20 years of secrets, each one deadlier than the last. And somewhere in the city, someone was watching, holding copies of Marion's letter, waiting to see if Edwin Lancaster could finally face the truth about the monster he'd become. Margaret Wilson's house was nothing like the luxury mansions Edwin was used to. It was a modest two-story home in Queens, with children's bikes in the driveway and wind chimes tinkling on the porch. This was the kind of normal family life his first wife Sarah had always wanted, before he convinced her that they needed more. As Edwin knocked on the door, he could see shadows moving behind the curtains. Multiple people. Margaret hadn't just called her immediate family, she'd called everyone. The door opened, and Edwin found himself face to face with David Wilson, Sarah's younger brother. The last time they'd met was at Sarah's funeral, where Edwin had played the part of the grieving husband perfectly. "You have some nerve showing up here," David said, his fists clenched. "Let him in, David." Margaret appeared behind her brother. At 60, she looked so much like Sarah that Edwin's heart clenched. "He says he has something to tell us about our sister's final days." The living room was packed with Sarah's family. Her elderly parents sat on the couch, her father in a wheelchair now. Two other brothers stood by the fireplace. Nieces and nephews who'd been children at Sarah's funeral were now adults, all staring at him with undisguised hatred. "Before I start," Edwin said, his voice shaking, "you should know that everything is about to come out anyway. My son, the one I abandoned, he has proof." "Marion." "Brooks left a letter?" "Marion?" Sarah's mother spoke up. "Her nurse." Edwin nodded. "She kept records of everything, including what really happened in those last weeks." "We knew something was wrong," Margaret said. "The hospital kept giving us different stories about why we couldn't visit. The lawyers kept changing the visiting hours." "Because I arranged it that way," Edwin admitted. "I made sure you couldn't see her when she was lucid, when she might have told you what was happening." David took a step forward, but Margaret held him back. "Tell us everything," she demanded. "No more lies." So Edwin told them about reducing Sarah's pain medication so she'd be clear-headed when the lawyers came, about convincing her that her family was too busy to visit, about the new will that left him in control of everything, signed when Sarah was too weak to truly understand what she was doing. "She asked for you," he said to Sarah's mother. "In her final hours when the pain was too much, she called for her mom. But I told the nurses you were away on a cruise." Sarah's mother broke down sobbing. Her father's hands gripped his wheelchair until his knuckles turned white. "Why?" David demanded. "She loved you. She would have given you anything you asked for." "Because I was afraid," Edwin said. afraid she'd tell you about the affair, about the baby that was coming. I couldn't risk losing everything. The room went deadly quiet. What baby? Margaret whispered. Edwin closed his eyes. This was the secret he'd buried deepest. Sarah was 3 months pregnant when she got sick. The doctors said continuing the pregnancy would make her cancer treatment less effective. They wanted her to make a choice. But I made it for her. You killed our sister's baby? David lunged forward, and this time Margaret couldn't hold him back. His fist connected with Edwin's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. David, stop, Margaret shouted. Let him finish. Edwin touched his bleeding lip. I told her the baby hadn't survived, that the cancer had taken it. She was heartbroken, but she never knew that I'd paid the doctors to... He couldn't finish. Sarah's mother had collapsed into her husband's arms. David was being restrained by his brothers. And Margaret was pulling something from a drawer. I think you should see this, she said, holding out an old envelope. Sarah sent it to me the day before she died. I never opened it. I wasn't ready to read her last words. Edwin took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, written in Sarah's shaky handwriting. Dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if Edwin gave you this letter like I asked him to, then maybe there's still hope for his soul. I know about the affair. I know about the baby, his baby with that waitress. The nurses talk when they think I'm sleeping. I know he's been changing my medications, making deals with lawyers. I know everything. But here's what Edwin doesn't know. I had a secret too. The baby we lost, our baby, I have proof of what really happened. I hid the real medical records in Daddy's old fishing cabin, under the loose floorboard where we used to hide our Christmas presents. I'm not writing this for revenge. I'm writing because the man I married is still in there somewhere, buried under all that greed and ambition. If he's given you this letter, it means he's finally found the courage to face what he's done. Tell him I forgave him, Maggie. Not for him, but for me. I couldn't die with hate in my heart, but tell him this too. Forgiveness doesn't mean freedom from consequences. All my love, Sarah. Edwin lowered the letter, his hands shaking. I never gave you the letter, he whispered. I found it in her things and hid it. I was a coward until the end. And now, Margaret asked, now that your son has forced you to face your sins, before Edwin could answer, his phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Time to add one more item to your list of demands, Father. Go to the fishing cabin, find the records. Then you'll understand why I chose this exact moment to reveal myself. By the way, Victoria's private investigator. He found something else too. Something about your second wife's accident. The brake lines didn't fail by themselves, did they? Edwin stared at his phone in horror. How could they know about that? He'd been so careful. Mr. Lancaster. A new voice spoke from the doorway. Everyone turned to see a police detective holding up his badge. We need you to come with us. We are reopening the investigation into Jane Lancaster's death. And this time we have new evidence. As the detective stepped forward with handcuffs, Edwin realized that Samuel's revenge wasn't just about exposing the past. It was about unleashing every dark secret Edwin had buried over the years. And somewhere in the city, Samuel was watching, knowing that this was just the beginning of Edwin Lancaster's fall from grace. The interrogation room at the police station was a far cry from Edwin's luxury penthouse. The metal chair was cold, the fluorescent lights harsh, and the coffee in the paper cup tasted like dirt. But none of that bothered Edwin as much as the pile of evidence folders sitting in front of Detective Gloria Martinez. Let's start with Jane Lancaster, Martinez said, opening the first folder. Your second wife, the brake failure that sent her car off Chapman Bridge 3 years ago. She laid out photos of the wreck. Except our new evidence suggests the brakes were tampered with. And guess who was caught on a security camera at the repair shop 2 days before the accident? Edwin stared at the grainy photo. There he was, talking to a mechanic who'd recently been found dead from an apparent suicide, with a suspicious offshore account containing $2 million. I want my lawyer, Edwin said weakly. Oh, you'll need one. Martinez opened another folder. Because that's not all. Remember Linda Carter? Edwin's blood ran cold. Linda Carter had been his company's financial controller 15 years ago. She disappeared after threatening to expose some creative accounting in the company books. "We found her, Mr. Lancaster." Martinez pushed forward another photo, or rather what's left of her. "Construction crew dug up the foundation of your old office building. Guess what they found under 20 feet of concrete?" The door opened, and a uniformed officer whispered something to Martinez. She nodded, then turned back to Edwin with a cold smile. "Your current wife is here." Victoria's been quite chatty with our officers, especially after we showed her what her private investigator found before his unfortunate accident. Edwin's mind raced. The private investigator Victoria had hired, the one Samuel had mentioned. What had he discovered before his fatal mugging 6 months ago? Victoria burst into the interrogation room, her designer outfit wrinkled, her makeup streaked with tears. "You monster!" she screamed at Edwin. "All this time I thought I was paranoid, but Richard found everything before you had him killed." Martinez gently guided Victoria to a chair. "Mrs. Lancaster, please tell your husband what Richard showed you." Victoria pulled out her phone, hands shaking. "Richard was smarter than you thought. He made copies, sent them to me through a secure server." She played a video, security footage from their penthouse garage from 2 years ago. It showed Edwin tampering with Jane's car. "I kept this hidden because I was afraid," Victoria said. "Afraid I'd be next. But your son found me last night, showed me Marion's letter, told me about Sarah, about the baby, about everything. And I realized I'm already dead if I stay quiet." Edwin slumped in his chair. Everything was unraveling, every careful plan, every buried secret, every murder disguised as an accident. All of it coming to light. His phone buzzed again. Another. Text from the unknown number. "Surprise, Father. Victoria's not the only one who's been gathering evidence. Did you really think I spent 20 years just building my own business? No. I've been building a case, finding your victims, connecting the dots. And now it's all coming together." Martinez laid out more photos, more evidence, more witnesses. Coming forward now that Edwin's wall of power was crumbling. "Mr. Lancaster," she said, "we have enough to charge you with 3 murders. And that's just the beginning. The FBI is very interested in those offshore accounts Linda Carter was investigating. The SEC wants to talk about decades of financial fraud. And the district attorney is looking into conspiracy charges for all those convenient accidents that happened to people who got in your way." Edwin's lawyer finally arrived, looking flustered. "Don't say another word," he advised Edwin. "We can fight this." But before he could say more, another officer entered with a tablet. "Detective Martinez, you need to see this. It's playing on every news channel." They turned on the wall-mounted TV. Samuel was holding a press conference outside the police station. "My name is Samuel Chen," he was saying, "though I've recently learned I was born Samuel Lancaster. 20 years ago, my father abandoned me at a train station because I was born with a disability that didn't fit his image of perfection. But that was just the beginning of his crimes." The camera panned to show a group of people standing behind Samuel. Edwin recognized them all: Jane's sister, Linda Carter's brother, the children of other accident victims. 20 years of victims, and their families all united. "Today," Samuel continued, "we're announcing the formation of the Lancaster Victims Justice Foundation, funded by the 50% of Edwin Lancaster's fortune that he's being compelled to surrender. We will provide support for the families he destroyed, investigate other suspicious deaths linked to his business dealings, and ensure that no amount of money or power can ever again shield a man from the consequences of his crimes." Samuel looked directly into the camera, and Edwin felt those familiar eyes, so like his mother's, staring into his soul. "Father," Samuel said, "you once left me alone in the cold, believing your reputation was worth more than your son's life. Now you'll face the winter you created. Every life you destroyed, every family you shattered, every crime you committed thinking money could bury the truth. It's all coming to light, and this time, there's no escape." The press conference continued, but Edwin couldn't hear it over the roar in his ears. His phone buzzed one final time. "Check your email, Father. I just sent you the security footage from Sarah's hospital room. The night you told her our baby hadn't survived. The night she begged for her medication. The night you stood there and watched her suffer, all to protect your lies. I wonder what a jury will think when they see it. Edwin Lancaster, the man who had once ruled a business empire through fear and manipulation, put his head in his hands and wept. Not from remorse, but from the terrifying realization that his own carefully constructed web of lies and murder had finally become his prison. And somewhere above the police station, Samuel Chen watched the news coverage with a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but the price had been 20 years of meticulous planning, countless sacrifices, and the death of any hope that the man who had abandoned him might have a shred of humanity left to save. The Lancaster Industries. Boardroom had never been so tense. 20 board members sat around the massive mahogany table, watching their empire crumble in real time on the wall of TV screens. The company's stock was in free fall, dropping 60% since Edwin's arrest 3 days ago. Alexander Thompson, Edwin's longtime friend and board chairman, slammed his fist on the table. We need to distance ourselves from Edwin immediately, issue a statement that we had no knowledge of his criminal activities. It's not that simple, said Helen Martinez, the company's lead counsel. She spread out a stack of documents. Samuel, Chen didn't just expose Edwin's personal crimes. He has evidence of corporate fraud going back 20 years. The SEC is already investigating. Chen? Alexander's face went pale. The disabled boy Edwin abandoned? The same, Helen confirmed. Except he's not a helpless child anymore. He's been planning this for decades, building his own company while secretly investigating ours, and he had help from inside. The boardroom doors burst open. FBI agents flooded in, led by a stern-faced woman holding a warrant. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Special Agent Rebecca Wong. This building is now part of a federal investigation. No one leaves until we secure all documents and electronic records. Meanwhile, across town at the Metropolitan Detention Center, Edwin sat in his cell watching his world collapse on a small TV. His designer suit had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit, his Italian leather shoes by prison slippers. The guard appeared at his cell. Lancaster, you have a visitor. Edwin expected his lawyer. Instead, he found himself face to face with Marcus Carter, Linda Carter's teenage son, now a grown man. Remember me? Marcus asked, his voice cold. I was 12 when my mother disappeared. When you buried her in concrete because she found out about your money laundering operation? Edwin said nothing. Samuel found me 2 years ago, Marcus continued. Showed me the evidence. Asked if I wanted to be part of bringing you down. You know what the worst part was? Finding out my mother was alive for days in that foundation before the concrete suffocated her. Edwin's hands began to shake. It wasn't supposed to... Save it, Marcus cut him off. I'm not here for explanations. I'm here to tell you that we found the others. The construction crews are digging up every building you renovated in the last 20 years. How many more bodies will we find, Edwin? Before Edwin could respond, his lawyer burst in. Don't say another word. He turned to Marcus. This interview is over, but Marcus was already leaving. At the door he paused. Oh, and Edwin, Samuel wanted me to tell you. He found the storage unit. The one where you kept the trophies. Did you really need to keep a souvenir from each person you killed? Back at the police station, Detective Martinez was building a murder board that covered an entire wall. Photos, documents, timelines, 20 years of Edwin Lancaster's crimes laid bare. The scope is staggering, she told her captain. We're looking at potentially dozens of murders, all disguised as accidents or disappearances. Lancaster built his empire on blood money, and his son found it all, the captain mused. 20 years of patient investigation must have cost him millions. That's the interesting part, Martinez said, pulling up Samuel's file. He didn't just investigate, he helped the victims' families, put their kids through college, funded their own investigations, all anonymously through a network of shell companies. He was building an army of witnesses just waiting for the right moment to strike. Her phone buzzed. Another piece of evidence had been found. This time it was a recording from Edwin's second wife's phone. Her final words as her car went off the bridge. Edwin, I know what you did to Sarah. I know about the baby. God forgive you. At the Lancaster penthouse, Victoria was packing her bags when Samuel appeared in the doorway. Going somewhere, he asked. Victoria spun around. You destroyed everything." "No, Victoria, Edwin destroyed everything. I just exposed the truth." He limped into the room, his cane tapping on the marble floor. "Including what you knew about Jane's murder." "I didn't. I was afraid." "I know," Samuel said softly. "That's why I'm here. The DA is willing to make a deal. Your testimony about the private investigator's evidence in exchange for immunity." Victoria sank onto the bed. "Why would you help me?" "Because unlike my father, I don't believe in punishing people for others' crimes." He placed a card on the dresser. "My lawyer will contact you tomorrow. Think carefully about your choice, Victoria. It's time to decide which side of history you want to be on." As Samuel left, his phone rang. It was Detective Martinez. "We found something in the fishing cabin," she said. "Medical records like your aunt's letter said. But there's more. Sarah Lancaster had a twin pregnancy. 2 babies." Samuel stopped walking. "What?" "According to these records, one fetus was healthy. The other showed signs of the same condition you have. Edwin didn't just lie about the pregnancy failing. He made sure only one baby survived. Your twin was the one with the perfectly healthy legs." Samuel leaned against the wall, his world spinning. All these years he'd thought he knew the depth of his father's evil. But this was beyond anything he'd imagined. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, just like the ones he'd been sending Edwin. "Hello, brother. Did you really think you were the only one who spent 20 years planning revenge?" In his cell, Edwin Lancaster stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the concrete. His phone privileges had been revoked after Marcus's visit, but he had one last text message to haunt him. "The twin survived, Father. And unlike me, he grew up without a limp, without a loving adoptive family, without anything except hatred for the man who tried to kill him before he was born. Samuel was never your biggest threat. He was just the distraction. The real storm is coming, and it's wearing your face." The guards doing their rounds that night would report hearing Edwin Lancaster laughing hysterically in his cell. The kind of laughter that sounds more like screaming. The kind that comes when a man realizes his greatest sins are only beginning to come to light. The man who walked into the Metropolitan Detention Center looked exactly like Samuel Chen. Same height, same features, same dark eyes. But he moved differently, with a predator's grace, no cane in sight. The guard checking his ID didn't even notice the difference. "I'm here to see Edwin Lancaster," he said, handing over his visitor's pass. "I'm his son." In his cell, Edwin looked up as the door opened. For a moment he thought Samuel had returned. Then he noticed the way the man moved. "Hello, Father," said Michael Stone, Samuel's twin brother. "Surprise." Edwin backed against the wall. "It's not possible." "But it is." Michael sat down, his movements smooth and controlled. "While you were busy abandoning Samuel at that train station, I was being whisked away to a very special adoption. Want to know who raised me, Father? The people you trusted to take care of Mum's pregnancy. The same people who helped you arrange all those convenient accidents over the years." Edwin's face went ash-white. "The organization—" "That's right." Michael smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "They saw potential in me, trained me, taught me everything about your little network of killers for hire. And now, I run it." Across town, Samuel was reviewing the medical records from the fishing cabin with Detective Martinez when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a photo of his adoptive mother. "Samuel, someone broke into the house." Mrs. Chen's voice shook. "They left something for you." 20 minutes later, Samuel stood in his childhood bedroom staring at the message written on his mirror in red. "Hello, brother. Time to meet the family." "We've got the security footage," Detective Martinez said, tablet in hand. "You need to see this." The video showed a man who looked exactly like Samuel except for the way he moved. He walked through the Chen's security system like it wasn't there, disabled their alarm with expert precision, and left his message with surgical efficiency. "His name is Michael Stone," Martinez explained. "Interpol has a file on him. He's suspected of running an international organization of contract killers, the same one that helped your father arrange his accidents." Samuel sank onto his old bed. All these years, I thought I was the only one plotting revenge. But he was out there, becoming something much worse. There's more, Martinez said grimly. We found records of payments from Lancaster Industries to this organization going back 30 years. Your father wasn't just their client. He was one of their founding members. Back at the prison, Michael was still talking, his voice casual, as if discussing the weather. You know what's funny, Father? While Samuel was building his medical technology empire, helping people with disabilities, I was building something too. Taking over the organization you helped create, expanding it, making it more efficient. Edwin found his voice. What do you want? Want? I want you to understand what you created. Samuel isn't the only one who spent 20 years planning. But, while he wants justice, Michael leaned forward, his eyes cold. I want destruction, complete and total. Everything you built, everyone you care about, every person who helped you abandon us, they're all going to suffer. You can't, Edwin whispered. The police, the FBI, Michael laughed. You think they can stop me? Half of them are on my payroll. The other half won't live long enough to matter. In fact, he checked his watch. Right about now, your lawyer should be having an unfortunate accident on his way to file your plea deal. Edwin's cell phone privileges might have been revoked, but Michael pulled out a phone and showed him a live feed. On the screen, Edwin watched, in horror as his lawyer's car exploded on the highway. That's just the beginning, Michael said. You see, Samuel exposed your crimes because he believes in justice. But me, I believe in poetry. Everything you did to others, every murder, every betrayal, every life you destroyed, I'm going to recreate them all. Starting with the people closest to you. He stood up, straightening his jacket. Oh, and Victoria's immunity deal. Let's just say she won't make it to her meeting with the DA tomorrow. Maybe I'll bury her in concrete like Linda Carter, or send her car off a bridge like Jane. Haven't decided yet. You're insane, Edwin gasped. No, Father, I'm your legacy. The son you wanted, perfect, strong, ruthless. Samuel got our mother's heart, but I got your soul. As Michael turned to leave, his phone buzzed. He smiled at the message. Well, what do you know? Samuel just figured out who I am. He's probably calling his FBI friends right now, thinking they can protect him. Poor, naive brother. He doesn't understand. This was never about just exposing your crimes. Edwin struggled to his feet. Then what? What do you want? I want Samuel to watch everything burn before I kill him. I want you to live long enough to see both your sons destroy each other. And most of all, Michael's smile turned cruel. I want the world to know that Edwin Lancaster's real legacy isn't the son he abandoned. It's the monster he created. After Michael left, Edwin collapsed onto his bed, shaking. His phone privileges were gone, but somehow a message appeared on the small TV in his cell. Tick-tock, Father. Tomorrow Victoria dies, then your lawyer's partner, then Samuel's adoptive parents. One by one, everyone who helped hide your secrets will face justice. My kind of justice. And the best part? There's nothing you can do to stop it. Welcome to the winter you created. It's going to be a long, cold season of death. In his office, Samuel stared at the police file on Michael Stone. 20 years of murders, all perfectly executed. No evidence, no witnesses, no mistakes. His twin brother hadn't just survived, he'd become death itself. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Ready to meet your brother properly? Come alone to Mom's grave at midnight. Don't worry, I won't kill you yet. First, you need to understand what our father really was, and why everyone who helped him has to die. Samuel looked at Detective Martinez. He's going to kill them all. Victoria, the lawyers, my adoptive parents, everyone involved in the original cover-up. We can protect them, Martinez insisted. No, Samuel said quietly. You can't, because Michael isn't just seeking revenge. He's recreating every murder our father committed. And the only way to stop him is what? Samuel picked up his cane, feeling the weight of it. Is to become exactly what our father feared most. Someone willing to destroy their own family to do what's right. The cemetery was silent under the midnight moon. Samuel stood at his mother's grave, his cane leaving impressions in the wet grass. The police had wanted to set up surveillance, but he'd convinced them to stay back. This was between brothers. Hello, Samuel. Michael's voice came from behind him. Right on time. Samuel turned to face his twin. It was like looking in a mirror, except this reflection moved with lethal grace, unmarked by their father's attempts to kill them before birth. You've been busy, Samuel said. 3 attempts on Victoria's life in the last hour. Michael smiled. Just warming up. Did you like how I recreated Jane's brake failure? Of course, Victoria's security team caught that one, and the poisoned coffee like Linda Carter. But the 3rd attempt? He checked his watch. Should be happening right about... An explosion lit up the sky in the distance. Fire bloomed over the city skyline. That was her safe house, Michael said casually. The same type of explosive father used on his first wife's family when they got too curious. Poetry, don't you think? Samuel's phone buzzed. A text from Detective Martinez. Victoria's safe. We switched safe houses an hour ago, but 6 officers died in the explosion. Those men had families, Samuel said quietly. So did we, Michael shot back. A mother who died in childbirth, a father who tried to kill us before we were born. But you got lucky, didn't you? Found by a loving family at that train station. While I... His smile turned cruel. I was raised by the people father hired to eliminate his problems. The organization, Samuel nodded. I found their files. 30 years of murder for hire, disguised as a corporate consulting firm. Father was one of their founding members. He was more than that, Michael said. He was their greatest success story, a businessman who used them to eliminate competition, silence whistleblowers, even kill his own wives when they learned too much. He started, circling Samuel slowly. But you know what's really interesting? The night he left you at that train station, he paid them to take me, to raise me as their own, to make me into something that could protect his empire, and instead you took over their operation. I learned from the best killers in the world, became better than all of them. And now? Michael's eyes glittered. Now I'm going to destroy everything Father built, starting with the people he trusted most. Samuel's phone buzzed again. Photos appeared. Surveillance images of his adoptive parents' house, his office, Detective Martinez's home. Your parents die at dawn, Michael said. Then the detective, then everyone else who helped expose Father's crimes, and you'll watch it all happen knowing you can't stop me. That's where you're wrong. Samuel's voice was steady. Because I didn't just spend 20 years building evidence against Father. I was hunting the organization too. Every killer, every client, every secret account. Michael's smile faltered. Slightly. Check your phone, Samuel said. Michael pulled out his phone. His eyes widened as he scrolled through message after message. His operatives being arrested worldwide. His accounts frozen. His safe houses raided. Impossible, he whispered. The organization isn't just being exposed. It's being destroyed. Right now. Every member, every client, every conspirator who helped Father all those years. Samuel took a step forward. Including the ones who raised you. Michael's composure cracked. You can't. They're too powerful. They were. Until an hour ago, when every scrap of evidence I've gathered over 20 years went public. Interpol, FBI, police agencies worldwide, they're all moving at once. Your kingdom is falling, brother. Then I'll kill you now, Michael snarled, pulling out a gun. End this game early, will you? Samuel asked calmly. Pull that trigger. Become exactly what Father wanted you to be. Michael's hand shook slightly. You don't understand. They made me into this. I never had a choice. There's always a choice. Samuel held out his hand. Help me finish this. Help me make sure no other child suffers what we suffered. For a moment, something flickered in Michael's eyes. A glimpse of the brother he might have been. Then his face hardened. No, he said coldly. I'm going to show you what a real revenge story looks like. He raised the gun. Goodbye, brother. The shot echoed through the cemetery. But it wasn't Michael's gun that fired. Detective Martinez stepped out from behind a tombstone, her service weapon still raised. Michael crumpled, clutching his shoulder. You knew, he gasped, looking at Samuel. Of course I knew. You're not the only one who can plan ahead. Samuel knelt beside his brother. I'm sorry it had to end this way. Michael laughed through the pain. End? You think this is the end? He pressed something in his hand. A detonator. Father's not the only one who kept trophies. I rigged every victim's grave with explosives. One click, and this whole cemetery goes up, including Mother's grave. Samuel didn't flinch. No, you didn't. What? Because I've known about you for months. Every move you planned, every trap you set, I was one step ahead. Those explosives were removed weeks ago. Michael's face showed real fear for the first time. How? Because you're not the only one who had help growing up. My adoptive parents. My father was FBI. My mother worked for the NSA. They adopted me knowing exactly who I was, assigned to protect me from the organization. From you. More police emerged from the shadows. Michael looked around wildly, realizing he was surrounded. It's over, brother, Samuel said softly. Father's empire is fallen. The organization is finished. All that's left is for you to decide. Die as their weapon or live as your own man. Michael stared at his twin for a long moment. Then he began to laugh, a broken, haunting sound. You want to know the real tragedy, brother? Blood seeped through his fingers where Martinez had shot him. I spent 20 years becoming a killer to destroy Father's legacy. But you spent 20 years saving people, helping the disabled, bringing justice. And in the end, he coughed, in the end you're the one who destroyed him. With kindness, with truth, with everything he thought was weakness. Samuel watched as the paramedics approached. It's not too late to change. Maybe, Michael whispered. But first you should know Father's last secret, the one even I didn't know until yesterday. His eyes locked onto Samuel's. We weren't his first abandoned children, there were others, and one of them is still out there, still waiting, still planning. As they loaded Michael into the ambulance, Samuel's phone buzzed one final time, a message from yet another unknown number. Well done, little brothers, but the real game is just beginning. Ask Father about the summer of 1982. Ask him about the twins he left in Boston. We've been waiting a long time for you to clear the way. In his prison cell, Edwin Lancaster woke from a fitful sleep to find a photo slipped under his door. 2 babies in a hospital bassinet, dated 1982. On the back, written in familiar handwriting, his first wife's handwriting, were the words, "They survived, Edwin. And someday, all your children will come home to roost." 1 week after the cemetery showdown, Samuel sat in an interview room at the federal prison facing his father. Edwin Lancaster looked like he'd aged 20 years in 7 days. His silver hair had turned completely white. "Tell me about Boston," Samuel said without preamble. 1982, the twins. Edwin's hands began to shake. "How did you—" Michael found out, and now someone's reaching out to us, someone who's been waiting even longer than we have for justice. "I was 25, Edwin whispered, "just starting to build my company. Sarah, my first wife. She wasn't my first love. There was another woman, Catherine Walsh. She worked at my father's bank." Samuel placed a photo on the table, the one that had been slipped under Edwin's cell door. 2 babies in a hospital. Bassinet. Catherine got pregnant, Edwin continued, his voice hollow. Twins. But my father threatened to cut me off if I married beneath our social class. So I told her I'd take care of everything, set up a trust fund for the babies, but instead you had the organization make them disappear. They were supposed to handle it quietly, find good homes for the babies. But Catherine, she must have found out what I was planning. She disappeared before they could act, took the twins and vanished. Samuel pulled out his phone, showing Edwin a series of messages. "Someone's been watching us, Father. Watching you. All these years. They knew about me and Michael. Knew about every crime you committed, but they waited. Why? Because they wanted to see justice done properly. Wanted your empire dismantled legally, your crimes exposed to the world. And now..." Samuel's eyes met his father's. "Now they're ready to reveal themselves." Edwin slumped in his chair. How many lives did I destroy?" "We're still counting. The FBI found more records in the organization's files. More children you abandoned, more families you destroyed. Michael wasn't the only one they raised. There were others scattered across the country. All of them trained, waiting, watching. God help me," Edwin whispered. "God's not the one you need to worry about." Samuel stood up. The Boston twins? They're not just survivors, Father. They're powerful. One's a federal judge. The other runs one of the largest private intelligence firms in the world. And they've spent 40 years building a network of all your abandoned children. Edwin's face went ash white. How many? 7 sets of twins, 14 children, scattered across 4 decades. Each pair split up, one given a normal life, one given to the organization. A twisted experiment to see which would be stronger, love or hate. I never knew. Of course you did. Every time you used the organization, every time you had them eliminate someone who threatened you, you were using the children you abandoned, the killers who did your dirty work, your own flesh and blood. Samuel's phone buzzed, a message with a video attachment. He played it for Edwin, the woman on. The screen was in her 60s, elegant and stern. She had Edwin's eyes. "Hello, Father," she said. "I'm Catherine Walsh's daughter. You knew her as the bank teller you got pregnant in 1982. I'm the one you tried to have erased. But Mother was smarter than you. She hid us, protected us, taught us how to survive." The camera pulled back to show a room full of people, men and women of varying ages, all bearing some resemblance to Edwin. "We're all here, Father," the woman continued. "Every child you abandoned, every twin you split up. We've been meeting. For years, planning, preparing. Samuel and Michael's revenge, that was just the beginning, the appetizer, you might say. Now that your empire is fallen, your crimes exposed, it's our turn." Another person stepped into frame, the woman's twin brother wearing a federal judge's robes. "Justice is coming, Father. Real justice for every child you threw away, every life you tried to destroy." The video ended. Edwin looked like he might faint. "They want to meet," Samuel said quietly. "All of us. One big family reunion. They'll kill me." "No. Death would be too easy." Samuel turned to leave. "They want you. To live, Father. Live to see every one of your abandoned children rise to power. Live to see them take everything you built and turn it into something good." He paused at the door. "The Boston twins. They're calling it the Lancaster Legacy Project. Taking your money, your companies, everything you built through crime and murder, and using it to help abandoned children. Giving homes to the homeless, education to the forgotten, hope to the hopeless. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know that your greatest sin, abandoning your children, became your greatest redemption. We survived, Father. All of us, and now..." Samuel smiled, but there was steel in it. "Now we're going to change the world. With the fortune you built through crime, we're going to help every abandoned child, every forgotten soul, every person society tried to throw away. And me?" Edwin's voice was barely a whisper. "You get to watch, from this cell, for the rest of your life." Samuel opened the door. "Oh, and Father, the Boston twins say there's still one more secret, one more set of abandoned children even they haven't found yet. So sleep well. Somewhere out there, your last lost children are waiting. And someday, they'll come home too." As Samuel's cane tapped down the prison corridor, Edwin Lancaster put his head in his hands and wept, not for himself, but for the twisted legacy he'd created. A network of abandoned children who had grown into an army of justice. And somewhere in Boston, in a luxurious office overlooking the harbor, Catherine Walsh's daughter raised a glass with her twin brother. On the wall behind them hung a massive family tree, showing not just Edwin's abandoned children, but their children as well. 3 generations of survivors, all connected, all waiting for this moment. "To Father," she said with a cold smile. "May he live a very, very long time, long enough to see everything he built become everything he feared." Her brother touched his glass to hers. "And to the ones we haven't found yet, don't worry, brothers and sisters, we're coming for you too." On their desk, a file lay open, hints and clues about Edwin's last secret, his final set of abandoned twins. And on top of the file, a single photo, 2 babies born in a Singapore hospital in 1990. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The end